I'm Robin.
And I'm Claudia.
We're lab demonstrators at Vancouver Community College in the science department. We're here today to show you how to do a heart dissection. So to start, we have the supplies we need for our heart dissection right here. So we have our heart, this is a sheep's heart, and we have the tools that we need as well. We're doing this in a wax dissecting tray. And we'll talk a little bit more about the tools in a few minutes. I'm also going to talk a little bit about safety. So for these labs, these specimens are preserved in a variety of preservatives. Those preservatives can be somewhat toxic, so we do make sure to wear protective gloves, and we also have our lab goggles on. So that's to avoid getting splashes in the eye from the dissection specimen. The lab goggles also protect against sharp objects such as the scalpel. So if this blade were to break or come towards your eye, the goggles will protect against that. The way we're going to do this lab, we're working in partners. We're going to have one of the lab partners read out the instructions in the lab manual, and then the other partner will actually do the incisions. If you're doing this yourself, it's a good idea to model this and do the same thing, but you can trade off throughout. So maybe you can take turns reading out the instructions. But it is very important to read the instructions because they take you through it stepwise. So today Claudia is going to read out the instructions and I'm going to do the dissection.
Now we have our heart on the tray. Now we have the tools there too. So we have the scissors, the scalpel, and the probes. We'll start with locating the flap, like left and right atrium.
Okay, there we go. You can see here it is. Looks a bit like a big elephant ear.
Okay. Now locate coronary blood vessels.
Okay, so here we can see is one of the coronary arteries. It's sort of a dark gray color right along here, and there's a number of them on the outside of the heart.
Determine the position of the left and right ventricle. Feel all around the heart. The right ventricle should feel softer than the left.
Okay, this side feels softer to me right here.
Okay, and small wrinkles will appear over relatively thin cardiac tissue that makes up the right ventricle.
There we go, we can see the wrinkles.
Yay! So place the heart so that the right atrium and ventricle are facing upward.
There we go. So again, we know this is the right atrium and ventricle because the right ventricle is softer than the left. Okay, and there's the atrium there.
Using a scalpel, bisect the atrium. Begin your cut in the middle of the right atrium near the top and continue the cut downwards to the apex of the heart. Because the heart muscle is very tough, it is best to cut a series of shallow cuts rather than attempting deep cuts.
You notice that I'm trying to keep the scalpel away from my fingers as well. So that's a good safety tip. Don't cut towards your fingers and don't cut towards anyone else's fingers either.
When you can see the inside of the ventricle, gently pull the incision open and observe the smooth lining of the chamber.
There we can see starting to open up. We can see some of the smooth lining right there. Okay.
Once you have the right side cut, turn the heart over with the left atrium and ventricle facing upwards. Bisect the left atrium and again continue the cut downwards to the apex. Because of the left ventricle, the wall is too thicker than the right, you will find it much more difficult to make this cut.
Might need to do another series of shallow cuts here. There we go, got it.
So by now, you have made 2 incisions and have cut through the outer wall of the heart. Now, cut the heart in half by cutting through the septum, starting at the apex and working downwards towards the top.
Okay.
This will produce 2 halves of the heart hinged at the top near the aorta. Separate the 2 halves by cutting up the sides of the aorta.
Okay, so the septum's quite thick, so again, you might have to do a few cuts to get through it. There we go, so we can see the septum right there. And now I'm going to, okay, so now I have it open, so now I'm going to cut all the way through the aorta at the top. There we go.
Now that your heart is dissected, locate the following heart chambers. Left atrium,
Okay, so we know this is the left atrium because it's right above the left ventricle. We know this is the left ventricle because you can see it's a larger chamber and it's got a thicker wall. Okay,
left ventricle.
so of course that's the left ventricle there.
Now right atrium,
Okay, so here's the right atrium.
right ventricle.
Okay, and this is the right ventricle. So recall earlier when we were probing the outside of the heart, we knew this side was the right side because the wall was thinner and we were able to produce wrinkles because it was thinner. So if you compare this to this, so this is the wall of the left ventricle versus the wall of the right, you can see that difference.
Now observe the following features. Right atrioventricular valve, or otherwise called tricuspid valve.
Okay, so the valves are, here we go, we can see the valve right there. Okay, so it's sort of a thin material. It's separating the 2 chambers of the heart. So it's separating the right atrium from the right ventricle. Okay, and you'll have another part of the valve over here as well.
Left atrioventricular valve, or mitral valve, or bicuspid valve.
Okay, so again, this thin flap of material here, separating the left atrium and left ventricle. And we also see some of it over here.
And now chordae tendineae.
Okay, so those are our heartstrings. Those are these little strings right here. And there's some, they're all throughout the heart, holding onto the valves.
Now use blunt probes to locate all of the following blood vessels that enter and leave the heart. In order to identify each blood vessel, you will need to probe the chambers of the heart to determine which blood vessel leads to and from which heart chamber. Aorta.
Okay, so here's the big aorta here. So we know, or we can see it's coming out of the left ventricle. Okay, and that's pumping blood to the rest of the body.
Pulmonary artery.
Okay, so this here is the pulmonary artery, and as we'll see in a moment, it comes through into the right ventricle. There we go. So that's pumping blood out to the lungs to get loaded up with oxygen.
Pulmonary vein.
Okay. So we can see the pulmonary vein here coming into the left atrium. Okay, so that is blood returning from the lungs, going back into the heart. It's full of oxygen now, and it's preparing to get pumped out to the rest of the body.
Vena cava.
Okay. The vena cava is right here. So we can see the vena cava, we can tell it's the vena cava because it's coming into the right atrium. So that's the blood returning from the body, going into the heart so that it can get pumped back out to the lungs to pick up some oxygen.
Now let's summarize it all. Left atrium, left ventricle, right atrium, right ventricle, right atrioventricular valve or tricuspid valve, left atrioventricular valve, mitral or bicuspid valve, chordae tendineae, aorta, pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein, and vena cava.
Okay, so that wraps up our heart dissection for the day. We're just going to do a little bit of work to get cleaned up, and then we're done. So we have our tools here. The tools will get rinsed well in the sink and then placed in the brown bin. The scalpel should go in the designated beaker so that we avoid having sharps in there and having lab demos touch that sharp blade. The leftover heart pieces will go in the biohazard container so that they're disposed of properly through the biohazard system. The tray here gets rinsed really well with water and then stacked near the sink, and then we'll do some more cleaning on it later. And the final step is to wipe down your lab surfaces with some wipes. There we go. So now it's clean and ready for the next one. Also, of course, take off your gloves. Those could also go in the biohazard disposal. And then we're done. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching us. We really appreciate your time. Hope everyone's doing well, and we will see you soon.
See you next time.